All right, folks, you are listening to the Yishai Fleisher Show, and we are live here on Facebook, Twitter. What's it called, that Twitter thing? Periscope, that's right, and YouTube all at once. And you are definitely invited to join us right now. And we are also on the Land of Israel Network as the Yishai Fleisher Show podcast. And today we have with us our beloved Rabbi Mike Feuer, star of Torah teaching stage and screen. Shalom, Rabbi Mike. Welcome to the show.
Shalom, Yishai. I feel like I just got a promotion or something.
Well, I don't know about promotion.
Star of stage and screen. I mean.
Well, I'll tell you why you get a promotion this week, and that is because I didn't get a chance to be with you last week. Both you and I were on separate beaches in the land of Israel,
same
state
coast,
of Israel.
Different sand.
Same coast, different sand, right? And but you were more towards the north. You were in a famous beach that was once even, I think, Phoenician.
Yes.
That's right. You were on a Phoenician beach and famous for its true blue tchelet creation. Is that right?
That is absolutely true. Chovdol. So it's
That's
a
right.
beautiful, beautiful spot.
Okay. And I was in Ashkelon in a more Egyptian, Gazan, Philistine. It's a very famous Philistine city, Ashkelon was. And of course, Samson also went down there. I mean, I don't want to make him look bad, but he killed 30 Philistines there in order to win back the bet that he had with the other 30 Philistines about his riddle, this famous riddle, the Samsonite riddle of what is from food, from the eater comes out food, and from
bitter comes the sweet.
Right. Is it bitter or more intense comes out something sweet, right? And that, of course, is the famous the famous riddle of the torn lion cub, which a hive of bees set up shop there and set inside and made honey. So that was in Ashkelon. So we were both in really ancient places. Tell me something. Do you get the feeling when you like me? Do you get the feeling when you're swimming in a beach like that? Do you hear the past, especially in light of the fact that you are a historian and are the head of the Jewish Story podcast here on the Land of Israel Network, jewishstory.co.il. Do you also feel like you're swimming with those Phoenicians or swimming with those Jews that made the blue dye there? Do you get that feeling?
That's funny you say that, because I was trying to really impress upon my kids how that what we were doing by vacationing, and it's really a huge blessing to be able to take a little bit of a break together with the kids, was fulfilling the dreams of so many of the people that had been standing on that very spot, a couple thousand years ago. That try to connect to imagine if they could see us now as we look at the ruins of where they lived, and we're playing in the tidal pools and seeing little crabs and fishies and whatnot. So yeah, it comes up.
In Chovdor, they have found pits of the boiling of the snails that were used, the Murex trunculi. Did I say that right? The Murex shell, in any case, that makes this tchelet, the tchelet blue string on the tzitzit. They've even found the physical lining of those pits with the dye in it.
Yes, it was one of the major points of argument for arguing that this is indeed the true tchelet and not a different type of dye.
Mm-hmm. And if anybody is interested in getting some of that dye today, please visit tchelet.com and put in coupon code Yishai, and you'll get, I think, 5% off, but I'm more negotiating for more for you out there so you can get your tchelet.
I don't think they still do it. They used to also do tours of Chof Dor where you could snorkel and find the murex, sea snails, and it's like a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
And we'll be certainly doing that again when this period of Corona is over. Right now, nobody's coming in or out of the country except a beautiful group of about 10,000 young people who are being let in on condition that they go to a 2-week motel quarantine, and that is
the defined spot.
Right, defined spot, but a lot of choosing to go to a motel, and this is the effort to bring in the gap year students, whether they be yeshiva or university, the folks that are coming in for the year. And I got to tell you something, I am so emotionally moved by this story because the state of Israel said, well, we got to keep the disease out, we got to keep people out. But these people, this is their one chance in life to come and spend a year in Israel. And we're not going to stop them. We're going to help them make it happen. And these are not just tourists. They are here for the year. and they made every government effort to make that happen. And the doors opened up and they are coming in right now. And I saw a picture of Rabbi Waxman from Shalabim welcoming his students for the year. And I just thought to myself, this was an effort to open up and to make sure that the next generation is going to be touched by Israel and not going to miss their year to connect to the life of Israel.
I mean, I'm personally grateful because I'm the faculty part of this, a faculty of Pardes Institute, as you know, and we were on pins and needles to know would our institution actually survive. I mean, was it going to be a loss? And in an educational institution that closes for a year rarely reopens ever again. And lo and behold, we actually have more full-time students this year than we had last year.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a testimony to both the recruitment and also to the fundraising, to making it happen. It's a fantastic effort.
So you're going back to Pardes starting very soon to teach physical.
Complex. Yeah, it's going to be complex. I mean, the mess and the separation and the indoor, outdoor, Zooming, but we're doing it. We're making it work.
Speaking of Zooming, I called today the internet company, the internet provider that I have in my house, which is called Hot, spelled Hey-Vav-Tet. I resent, there's a lot of signs in Israel in English, so I a little bit resent that. So I call it Hot, H-O-T. By the way, speaking of English and Hebrew signs, yesterday I went bowling. Bowling. No. Yeah, bowling.
Yes, I saw your tweet with it when the going gets tough, the tough go bowling.
That's right. And I was bowling in Jerusalem yesterday with an immense amount of ultra-Orthodox Jews, all wearing face masks and all just having the time of their life. And I want to tell you something. They were bowling, and women and men, and there's a Glatt kosher, Mahadran kosher is more correct, pizzeria there, and air hockey, and video games. And it was for my son's 9th birthday, and we had a great time there yesterday. And it was just fun to. That's right. And I just want to explain to people that if you come to Israel and you ask anybody about bowling, they won't know what you're talking about. They know bowling.
It's just an awkward mispronunciation.
And it reminds too much of the word bowel. But for most people here in Israel, that's not a problem. So I went bowling yesterday in Yerushalayim, and it was just, how could I say, a beautiful feeling. Now, in order to keep Jerusalem safe, we've got police, border patrol, and other kinds of security apparatuses. In fact, just yesterday, we had an attack in the Old City, an effort to stab a border patrol police officer, and the culprit was shot. I think was killed, or maybe in critical condition. I don't remember. But the bottom, and I don't mean to make light of it in any way. But the bottom line is that we have police, and after such a person is apprehended or shot, we also have a system of law. And in the Old City of Jerusalem, especially, this law is found in the gates. in the gates of the old city. The reason I say this is because our Torah portion, which is in the book of Deuteronomy, the book of Dvarim, and is the starts chapter 16, verse 18, talks about a very famous phrase, shoftim v'shotrim, judges and officers, police officers, if you will. That's a modern translation, I guess. Titen lecha, you should put for yourself, b'chol sha'arecha, in all of your gates. Asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach. These gates are not just your gates. They're the gates that God has given you. Very interesting phrase. It didn't have to kind of say that God has given you these gates. It's a blessing to have these gates. Literally a blessing of God. For your tribes, that He has given you these lands. And these judges and officers have to judge the nation a judgment of justice.
Sounds good.
Sounds really good. First thing is the question of why does it say in all of your gates? Not in all of your dwellings, not in all of your cities, but all of your gates. Now, the technical answer is that judgment was done in the gates in the old world, and we have even found in many ancient gates benches that line the gates, and basically, and we even have stories like in the book of Ruth that as people come into the gate, they're told to sit down to see the judgment, to witness the judgment. The judges would sit there. This was an intersection, if you will. But the Hasidic thought adds another level, which is so fabulous. It says you got to put police officers and judges at your gates. Your gates are the gates to the you, and those gates are your eyes, your ears, your mouth. Yep. You got to guard what comes in,
and what comes out.
You got to guard what comes out. You got to guard what you hear, and you got to guard what you say, and certainly guard what you look at, and also probably guard what you show. And so that is the added value. What do you think about the guards and judges at the gates? Excuse me, at the gates.
I mean, as you're describing, this is the essence of civilization, and I don't think it should be taken lightly. This whole parsha actually gives, at least in a cursory sense, an examination of all the models of leadership that the Torah really considers. Shoftim v'shotrim, like you said, judges and the officers. We're going to get the priests, the Kohanim. We'll talk about the Navi, the prophet. We're going to, of course, talk about the king, right? So there's in this parsha laying out of what we call civilization, because the base level definition of civilization, at least in my eyes, is the idea that there is a structure within which everyone functions, which at least strives to treat people on the basis of law and not simply sort of naked power and personal interest. Now, of course, there's no perfect system, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go into that. And in fact, what's really kind of, there's a very subtle distinction in this pasuk is that we've already seen a command for shoftim. In fact, judges, we've been seeing commands that there should be judges since Yitro, since the Torah was given to Moshe at Sinai. The chiddush, the innovation here, is the shotrim, is the police. And one of the ways to understand this is that all of Devarim, Deuteronomy, the Mishnah Torah, the repetition, is a preparation now that you've been living in the desert for 40 years, you've been learning Torah, it's been great. You're about to meet reality in the land of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And reality is, of course, in a perfect world, there would only be judges and there wouldn't be police. Today in America, everybody's, not everybody, but there's a certain section of America saying defund the police. Why? Because they see the police as part of the problem. There shouldn't be a need for enforcement. Okay, I'm not going to get into their discourse. But what the reality is that police are a recognition of the imperfect nature of both justice and human behavior. You need somebody to back things up, because not everybody does things because they're right. A lot of people do things because they're afraid, right? Or because they feel threatened. And the reality is, never forget Max Weber's definition of the nation state, which is a monopoly on the legitimate use of force to maintain order. Mm-hmm. You gotta have police if you want your courts to survive, he said, because that's the nature of the beast. And so that is important to me. And the other thing, which I think we're going to pick up in the next few verses, is, of course, the burning question here is, what is mishpat tzedek, right? Because mishpat is the activist judgment. Tzedek is justice or righteousness. It's an absolute standard. right? And one of the problems is that these are words that get thrown around. Again, you look at everything that's happening in the protests in America and a lot of the social upset. People want justice, they want justice, but there's no live discussion of what that word actually means.
Right.
In fact, I think an active attempt to suppress that discussion, because the reality is there's no consensus, and therefore you have to get into a real values discourse if you want to get anywhere.
Yoram Chazoni has a very long article that just came out.
I just read it. I got it off your Twitter feed, actually.
Oh yeah, it's good, right? It's a very serious article. And one of the points that he makes is that Marxism has a powerful claim, which that societies have oppressed an oppressor. But one of the critiques that he points out about Marxism is that while it's a kind of open-eyed critique of society, it's the other side of it is a very lame answer, which is, oh yeah, when the oppressed will seize power of the state, then they'll get rid of oppression. And the many examples of the so-called oppressed, like for example in Russia, where the workers, destroyed the Romanov, what do you call it, Tsarism? I don't know, the Romanov dynasty. The people that took over, the folks, the Tsars, the Romanovs were quite harsh on the people. But the people that took over were far from better.
You know what I think of? You know what the image that sticks with me? I know this will touch you. I think of the Arabs of Gaza torching the greenhouses that we were forced to leave behind when our brothers and sisters were taken from their home. Not even to get into the justice or injustice of this disengagement. Just that image. It's like here they forced us to leave behind what could have made the Jews of Gaza were growing incredibly. It was a productive economically and agriculturally. And here these people that were supposedly the oppressed, who gained power in that movement, what did they do? Destroy. They destroyed. Yeah, no, Chazoni's point is well taken, is that Marxism works very well as a critique, but it's lousy as a means to construct society. And that's, by the way, always true, because deconstruction by definition can't build. Never forget that. Listen to the word. Deconstruction by definition cannot build, because to build something means you have a bedrock belief, which you will decide or you will believe or something is non-negotiable, because otherwise you have nothing to build on. Right? And that's where the conservatism that Chazoni advocates is something which, consciously or not, anyone who builds a society has a conservative element upon which they're building.
Right. That's a very interesting point. The revolutionaries have built societies, but they've been exactly the opposite of what their claim is.
Well, they're always better at destroying societies than building them, because in the end they have to reach for the reactionary stance just to build.
By the way, I'm going to say I want to say something political, but I'm going to say something about American politics, which is not usually
less common. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, less common, and I don't want to overstate the case, and I don't want to get in too much into it. I just want to make a little point and put it all out there as a thought.
This is all you framing. You're shutting me down when I want to respond.
Not you. I meant the people out there. I'm not saying this with. Sometimes you want to say something without too much emphasis, not as emphatic.
Yeah.
I want to say it, and you can buy it or not buy it, because I myself am not 100% certain of it. But I've been looking at the American elections that are happening in November, and I'm looking at the Democrats and what they're offering for president and vice president. And what I've written a few times on Twitter, and I see that people don't really want to kind of buy into it, is I don't think that the Democrats are playing to win. It just doesn't look to me like they want to win. They put up this guy. I'm not now taking a partisan side personally. I'm not. That guy, Joe Biden, he doesn't seem like a great candidate. He seems like he's not 100% well. He's certainly not making coherent phrases, or he makes a lot of mistakes. He doesn't sound like a great and certainly not charismatic leader. And he sounds, senile, and many people have pointed that out. And Kamala Harris, for good and for bad, she's a very interesting and smart lady, but has not polled well in the past in likability in the Democratic, in the, what do you call them, the primaries. And I think to myself, wait a minute, you just put up two people that are not like awesome stars to win and to beat the incumbent President Trump. And I thought to myself, well, maybe it's just incompetence, or just, or maybe it's just it didn't work out, or maybe they don't want to win. Maybe some elements in that party want another 4 years of Trump so that they could protest, do BLM, do more deconstruction rather than construction, and then swoop in after 4 more years of this out and out battle, this battle that's in the media but in the streets as well. Sure. And then take over. But right now, to offer up a real change and to actually have to take the reins and responsibility, maybe somebody there doesn't want that, so they want to throw the fight. They want to feign it. Now, do I know this for a fact? Far from it. It's just a thought. And I don't mean this as a partisan person. I mean this just like as somebody
looking to analyze the situation,
right? Looking from the outside in. But that's what it looks to me like. It doesn't look like they really want to win. That's the point. Like and not only that, there were other candidates that were more exciting and could have been more exciting. Like a Michelle Obama as VP would have maybe taken the cake.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying.
Okay, thought. Yeah. Let's end parentheses there. Let's go to something. But speaking of America, New York, in my law school in New York, Cardozo Law, in downtown Manhattan, there was a slogan. The slogan was the mission statement was right from chapter 16, verse 20. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. That was the motto of the school. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice shall you pursue. Leman tichya. This part they didn't add into it.
This is the part that always gets chopped.
Right. So that you shall
live.
The
social justice world loves this first three words of this pasuk. The rest they kind of whoopsie.
Right. That's right. So it says leman tichya, so that you shall live. V'yarashta et haaretz, and you shall inherit the land. But maybe they could see it more generally, the land of earth. If you pursue justice.
You can definitely see this generally because there is a direct connection here. At least 2 things to remember. First of all, absolute justice is always a pursuit. It is never an achievement. And this is the danger of the sort of utopian element in Marxist thought, like you were speaking about before. I mean, like the critique of society and the application of sometimes even harsh justice is very important, but it's always a process, never a product. You will never achieve tzedek, right? But the constant pursuit of it is what roots you in the land, meaning in the reality of embodied life. You want to continue, want to live and thrive as a society, then you have to make justice your constant pursuit. And I personally think that, forget America, this needs to become front and center within our society right now. There's just too much of a presence of corruption and interests within our government and within even just the social discourse. I wouldn't say that we're rotten to the core, God forbid, but the rot is too present. And I just would like to see it, leaving aside again, for right now at least, the substance of what that justice is. Because I think it could be expressed in many ways. But even as an aspiration.
So a word that you've said a few times here, and it's interesting, even within your language, I see utopianism as a utopian justice or a yearning for utopia. And also a pragmatic, this worldly, like pursue a utopian vision, but understand it in a real world. A little bit reminds me of that famous Greenpeace slogan, one of the best slogans ever, which is think globally, act locally.
Sure.
And this is like think messianically, act temporally, or something like that,
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you realize that encapsulates the sort of divine genius of Torah? Because it is a way in which one can live a gritty, earthy life. I mean, I'm working with a couple of chatanim, a couple of young men who are looking to get married, and we're learning the detailed halachot of the most intimate parts of married life. Why? In order that they can build a vessel of marriage, which is an ideal that they're envisioning. And I
want to pause here for a second and explain to people. In Judaism, before you get married, you basically take a class with a mentor. Women with women, men with men, and they talk about life, married life, in terms of halakha, in terms of Jewish law, and also advice, and also about intimacy and the laws of Jewish intimacy. And we talk about it so that we get a handle on these things, and again, come to it from a conservative, or shall we say, tradition, and from the word tradition, a tradition of how to move forward in life, a wisdom, a combined wisdom, a historical wisdom.
Yeah, and my specific point is that there are 2 primary values in my learning and what I've been taught that these laws embody, and they are sanctity and natural desire. The problem is, without guidance and behavior, how are you ever supposed to make those things real in your life? Because those are ideals to pursue, they're things to dream about. But the beauty of the genius, the divine genius of Torah, is you get actual grounded instructions. Sanctity is important to you. Here's how you build it into your life. Natural desire is the right thing, and with the proper outlets, here's how you build it into life. Here's how you balance the two. Here's how you have a discussion and a conversation, and it's just always fantastic to me. And it's such an important thing to remember, that the key word is tirdof. It's a constant pursuit and never an achievement.
Very good. Okay, and this the question of utopia brings me to the next verse that I want to talk about. Chapter 17, Book of Dvarim. Torah portion is Shoftim, verse Tet, which is verse 9. This part, and this is a recurring theme in this Torah portion, is about today. Bring the law to today. Deal with the priests, the judges, the cops of today.
Yeah.
And it says like this: Ubata el kohanim haleviim ve'el shofet. You're going to come to the priests, to the Levites, and to the judges. Asher iyeh b'yamim hahem. That'll be in those days, or in your days, whenever you're going to be reading this. V'darashta, and you'll demand law, demand justice. V'higidu lecha et dvar hamishpat. They'll tell you the law. Meaning to say, Moses is saying, like, deal with the judges of your time. Yeah. Don't just hearken back to some kind of perfect utopia or previous time. Deal with the stuff that you have. And then it continues, Vesita al pia davar asher yagidu lach, and do according to the thing that they tell you. Mina makomahu, from that place, which is the Temple Mount, asher yivchar Hashem, which God will pick, veshamata lasot kechol asher yerucha, and keep to do exactly which they instruct you. And later on, Moses is also going to say there will be a prophet in your time like me, a prophet that will come from your brothers like me. Deal with him. Listen down the line. Don't make a cult of the past.
Yeah, no,
which is funny, right? Because we call this Torah the Torah of Moshe, right? And we're very into the past, and we're always living. What's that?
Sure. We're quite committed to it,
right? We're quite. But then he says, yeah, but watch out. And we have a concept called halacha kibatrai, which means the halacha as it's brought down to you.
Well, no, it literally means halacha is like the later authorities.
Which is the later authorities, which is basically like read the halachic law, but then ask the rabbi of the time, because there may be something called the internet, and things will be different, or electricity, or an aeroplane. Yeah, a microwave. For example, the halacha that you're allowed to fly in an airplane on Shabbos as long as you put your seatbelt on, because that way you're wearing the airplane.
Come on.
That was a joke. That was a joke, everybody. Joke. That was an inside baseball joke.
Yeah, it was an inside baseball joke. But the key here is, and Rashi, I think, says it so beautifully. He says, "He says, okay, why did the pasuk say the asher b'yamim haim, who's in those days? Because you know what? He may not be Moses. He may not be Shmuel. He may not be Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai or Rav Moshe Feinstein. You know who he is? You got to live in the world you actually live in. It's not just what you're saying, which is that the world keeps changing, and the reason that we have Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torahs, it's the constant application of an unchanging written Torah to an evolving world. You're going to remember that. That's a given in the Torah, that you're going to be constantly moving in a changing world. But it's also just reality, like you said. Listen, you don't think it could have been better, so work on that. Meanwhile, this is what you got. Deal with reality. Don't get nostalgic and think woulda, coulda, shoulda was better than when.
That's so interesting and important for us here in Israel, because we're living in a time where we are reborn in our land, re-embodied in our land, as you say a lot of times. And we got to hearken back, on the one hand, to archaeology and to the past and to the and to previous commonwealths like the Maccabees, but then we're also obviously in a uncharted territory.
Completely.
Right, and we have to move it forward. And right now I see a comment, somebody commenting on our broadcast. Galia, she says everybody just wants Mashiach. And I just want to say right immediately here, which is, I guess it's a perfect balance of what we're talking about, which is utopia, we yearn for Mashiach, but at the same time, as you and I discussed in the past, sometimes we push back on that because we don't want to give up. We don't want to give up our responsibility and the call to establish and build a Jewish state with law and to actually get into the nitty-gritty and deal with it and build the country, and not just say, well, this other dude is going to take care of everything.
Yeah, as we've discussed, I actually don't. That's not how I conceive of Mashiach at all. The salvation model is not
right.
how I conceive of it. We've talked enough about that, but I would like to just point out an important diuk, which you read, but think deserves some emphasis, is that the only way in which past and present, and ultimately, of course, future, can be woven into a whole is if you have a center around which to do it. And one of the themes of the whole book of Devarim, and in particularly of this parsha, is Makom Asher Yivchar. Right? There's going to be a place, God tells them, I'm going to choose, where you're going to take this whole Torah I've given you, which you're not allowed to change, and you're going to slam it into the present in order to get to the future on a constant basis. And that's going to ultimately be in Yerushalayim on the Temple Mount, because that's the place where heaven and earth connect. And one of the reasons that we are, in many ways, as a people, somewhat stuck, both in our halachic system and in our ability to adjudicate, because it's true halacha kibat try that the general principle is that the law follows the latter authorities, but we also are, to a certain degree, lack the structures to do this hora'ah. I mean, in the pasuk it says kol asher yorucha. There's a very important type of instruction. In fact, most linguists believe that is the root meaning of the word Torah. Torah comes from the same word as yoreh. It's a practical instruction. But the ability to actually do instruction on that level ended for us in the 6th century. And since then, it has not been halacha kibat try. And what we're looking for is, it's the reason that the Sanhedrin, the high court, sits on the Temple Mount, because that's the place where past meets present in order to create a viable future. So I just think it's important that reference is here in the verse. It's not just a casual, oh, they got to sit somewhere. It's
Are you talking about the fact that there is no Sanhedrin today, and that there's no Torah legal body that is a central body that can decide big questions that we're basically pushing off, not deciding in our time, and kind of the writ large, like we kind of treating this time of the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel as a kind of better version than exile, but not quite.
This is as usual with some slight adjustments, right? As opposed to the very revolutionary time in which we said, I mean, listen, I don't want to go too far into it, but certainly in Rav Kook's conception, the Sanhedrin, which is inextricably bound up with the temple. It's important to remember, these are not like two separate institutions which coincidentally happen to sit in the same place. Like, no, that's not the way it works, right? But Rav Kook speaks about how, like, all the questions that really plague us today, whether what plagues you is questions of gender and sexuality, or whether what plagues you is questions of relationship between Jew and non-Jew, or whatever it may be, all those questions will be in the power of the Sanhedrin to adjudicate on the level of Moshe Torah Sinai. Mm-hmm. That's a powerful, powerful way to actually bring ourselves into the present in order to shape the future.
Yeah, and I want to tell you that I've been learning a booklet called the Shichnoti Dreshu, which is about going up to the Temple Mount. And then I saw two rabbis really calling for one thing, which was, God bless you, which is Rabbi Tikachinsky, a gadol in our time, and also Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu. They are not yet calling for a Sanhedrin on the Temple Mount and all that, but they did ask both of them for a mechanical, technical, but very important step, which is to create a house of prayer on the Temple Mount. They said, let's start there. Praying on the Temple Mount is a commandment.
Disgrace to our people and our nation state. There is no such thing.
Right.
That's my opinion.
Right. But you know what? I thought to myself, this is actually doable. It's actually doable. This is doable within the reality right now. The South.
All you would need is a small group of committed people who simply wouldn't give up on it.
Right. Okay. Now we talked about worship of the past, which is dangerous, but there's also a danger in the worship of the future, or a need to find out the future. There's two kinds of utopias, really. There's the utopia that you look to the past. There's the utopia that you look to the future. But then there's something, maybe it's not exactly utopia, but it's a need to know the future, which is necromancy and other kinds of fortune telling,
Right, anxiety-driven living.
Right, and God detests, he says, that that mode. He says that the nations that were in the land before that, they dealt a lot with it. By the way, I didn't get a chance to visit it, but I'm hoping to visit the Museum of Philistine Culture in Ashdod, and it's really there with tons and tons of stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. But in any case, they certainly dealt with necromancy and other things like that. And then the Torah finishes off with a flurry, one of the most famous verses, certainly in these parshiot, which is Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha. Instead of worshiping the past or the dead and trying to figure out the future and spitting out bones and trying to read them, how did the bones fall and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah, or slaughtering a goat and seeing if its innards were nice. Right, and shells. Forget that. God says, Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha, be whole with Hashem your God. Baal Shem Tov says, Tamim, if you're whole, tiyeh Hashem Elokecha, you will be with Hashem your God. Rashi says, walk with him with simplicity and look to him. Don't try to figure out the future. Whatever comes upon you, receive with wholeness, with acceptance, and then you will be part of him and his lot. You will be part of him when you when you accept Hashem's decrees, life challenges, life situations. And here, just to get a little metaphysical for just a second, we are not, our choice, our range of choices is extremely limited. We are not really, we don't have as much choice as we think. Not what our soul is, not what our body is, not when we were born, into whom we were born, what time and what station in life, and many other things are not within our grasp to decide. And so when you get to the bottom of it, you realize you really do have to accept so much. And sure, you should strive and be ambitious, etc. But at the same time, there's so much to accept in God's what God has given us in this world. Or another acceptance is, certain limitations that humanity has. We live in, and the greatest limitation of them all is death.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. Or body. You could just say the same thing, right? Body in itself is limitation. Earth is limitation.
Those three have obviously an intimate relationship. Death,
right. They're all limitations that or if you see, maybe another way to say it is like gravity is like time is like death. It's like if you know what I mean, you can't really.
They're all a drag.
They bring you down. And you can't really defeat it. You can't really defeat it. But God says, with all that, I tell you in the Torah, accept God's leadership, his decrees, with wholeness, with acceptance, with love, with appreciation, with understanding that it's his world, as in Shawshank Redemption, it's your world, boss. Sometimes you got to say to God, it's your world, boss.
Yeah, I mean, it's Mimut. There's a simplicity. It's like, don't tie yourself in knots over this. Don't try to come up with sophisticated explanations. Okay, maybe there's a place for that, but the bottom line, it's not going to serve you.
Right, but still, though, ironically and beautifully, hitalech lefanai, walk before me.
Well, that's what I was saying.
It's not here. It's about Abraham.
The original statement, exactly. Right. I wanted to go back. That level of tmimut, which Rashi hints at in this verse, in his comment there, that level of tmimut isn't just a passive acceptance of "Thy will be done," religious fatalism. What happens is when you're able to receive what comes to you as an invitation from God, you become the place in which the divine will unfolds forward. That's why it's Abraham, you're out in front of me, Abraham. And Abraham says to God, where are we going? God says back, I don't know. Where are we going? It's the same way in your own life. God's sending you all these things. You might think that your job is to just be passive. And no, your job is to receive them as from God and act upon that premise.
Right. And also Chazal tell us, our sages tell us, like in the path that a person wants to go, they take him. The global energies, the path will take him the way he wants to go.
Life is not an arbitrary string of events, and whether you want to take the sort of a priori stance, like you were pointing out, that God is sending you the things that that will take you where you want to go, or where you want to take say the stance, the more postmodern stance, say that Rav Kook says that what human consciousness is the capacity to string together the events of life into what I would call a meaningful narrative. Either way you look at it, it means that very delicate balance, which we call tmimut, of being able to receive what is and yet not become completely passive in the face of it, is the key to living a life of avoda, divine service.
It's not an easy thing we're discussing. There is a dichotomy here.
Yeah.
There is a dichotomy, because on the one hand we said accept, on the other hand lead.
Yeah, it's not a passivity. And the question is what does active acceptance look like? And I would say that the word that always helps me is I try to look at the things that happen in my life as an invitation. Instead of saying, why did this happen to me? It's what can I make of this? Mm-hmm. Each thing that happens is a question to you. What does this mean? What does this mean?
That's right.
It's an invitation to therefore develop its meaning.
Yesterday I went to the bowling alley, and then when we came back home, and please people don't misunderstand. This is not a family of bowlers. I'm not a bowler, and with
the shoes and the whole the shirt and whatnot.
No, I don't have a shirt and I don't have the shoes. And we were using the bumpers. The bumpers were out. There was no what do you call those, gutters? There was no gutters.
Oh,
okay,
come on.
It was kids. It was a 5-year-old,
you got
four 9-year-olds, and a 12-year-old, and the parents, and we lost big time. I was by far the fastest bowler, but no matter how fast I bowled, I hit less pins altogether down than people who bounced. And when we came home, it was very, very loud there. It was very, very, very loud. For a person like me, I have to have headphones, and I cannot deal with that kind of noise. But the reason I say this is when we came home, I was like, oh, bummer, we didn't say a Dvar Torah. And maybe I forgot because of the noise and the action and the eye stuff. But it's easy to forget to mention God, to bring him in. It's easy to be living in the moment and kind of forget the thing about God is he's oftentimes invisible. And you can, given the wrong kind of environment, totally just kind of forget it. Okay, so I made up for it when we came home. Another thing is we have a commandment, V'lech lecha v'derech, when we're on the path, to also talk divrei Torah. We in our family we try very hard to fulfill that. Like if we're in the cart, you have to say a Dvar Torah. That's like an important thing because the Torah tells us when you're on the pathway. But it's easy to forget sometimes on the road.
Sure,
it's easy to forget God, and to bring him in is a big mitzvah. Okay, so we talked about not present worship, not past worship, but to draw from the past, to look to yearn for the future and to lead towards the future.
You make your actions matter in the present. Right.
And now let's talk about the circle. The circle is found in the verse, chapter 20, verse 21, kind of famous. Lo techos einecha, do not avert your eyes when somebody does a bad thing. Nefesh benefesh, soul for a soul, ayin b'ayin, an eye for an eye, shen b'shen, tooth for a tooth, yad b'yad, a hand for a hand, regel beragel, a foot for a foot. What the first thing is there is, and this is a Jewish concept, there is karma. There is karma in this.
Yeah, I really deeply dislike.
You don't like that
terms? No, I mean,
cultural appropriation.
No, I don't care about the cultural appropriation.
Did I just culturally appropriate?
Necessary to reach.
I'm sorry.
To another culture in order to explain concepts which originate in our own. Which is what you mean is that there's justice.
Yeah, but I mean a justice of some kind of karmic nature, meaning to say
justice in the sense that one's actions create a reality which responds, that we live in a responsive creation, which is a general principle of Torah, which, by the way, in a fascinating sense, the physicists now in the 21st century are starting to come around.
We're talking about like the butterfly effect.
It's not just that. The nature of where quantum physics is headed in terms of the role that consciousness plays in the physical substance of creation. I don't go too far with this, but it's the general model of understanding the relationship between your consciousness and creation used to be, my consciousness is basically a computer. Let's think of it as, it's called the computer model. It's mapping the world around me, but it's not affecting it. I only can affect the world is through my actions, right? Whereas already in the early 20th century, there was a dawning awareness amongst physicists that actually my very observation of the world begins to change it.
Right.
To the point where we're now coming along much, much further beyond the sort of theoretical, what's called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, much further down the line in quantum physics, and understanding that to some degree we create the world through our interaction with it. Just the assumption of the Torah, which is why Tamim Tiyai Mashem Elokecha is so important. Like, because the reality is, so we didn't get into it, but there's a big question. It's like, why is the Torah so head up about these necromancing sorcerer, wizard, magician guys? I mean, that's all nonsense, right? It's not real, right? So one answer, like the Rambam says, no, it's not real, but you should still be careful of the shtuyo because everybody thinks it's real. The Ramban says, no. Like the way that God created the world is such that you believe in these evil powers and you give them reality. You live in the world which you choose. And that's part of the expression is eye for an eye, like you're saying. That's why I don't like the term karma. We lack a good term. Karma's got a good. Also, I have to admit that I don't actually have a deep understanding of what karma is. I know the way it gets used in popular Western culture. But
I think the Rashi on karma is what goes around comes around.
Yeah, but that's my point. That's how it's used in Western cultural discourse. Right. I don't know if that's actually what it means.
All right.
I don't like in general. I don't feel. I think it's a discredit to Torah when we reach for concepts from other cultures to articulate.
All right, actually, maybe I'll counter that and say sometimes there is a wisdom in another culture that when you look through that prism, you're like, oh, I get that better now. For me, as I've said many times on the show, concepts like I'll give you just a few. Sometimes and of course, don't take it out of context, people. But sometimes I say. When I look at Shmuel Hanavi, the tomb of Samuel the prophet above Yerushalayim, I say, if I had to borrow a term, I would call him the quote-unquote patron saint of Jerusalem, right? Because he's like looking over and he yearned for this Jerusalem and helped David find it. And there he is, and he's looking down upon him, and his tomb was liberated on the 28th of ER. That's one example. Another example is sometimes I explain to people what the Jewish community of Hebron is about. So I say, well, in another culture, we would be called the Knights of the Machpelah, the protectors of the Machpelah. That's what we'd be called, the Knights of the Machpelah. And so people are like, oh, yeah, I get it now. I get it, Yeah. So sometimes cultural things like help us understand even our deeper, more foundational, sometimes they've developed a lingo for us.
I hear it. I'm still a little bit of a cultural absolutist. I don't like it. No,
you just don't want cultural. What do you call it? That thing. Anyway, okay. Let's go on. We have a few minutes left. A big part of this Torah portion is dedicated to war. What is it good for?
I mean, I can name several things, but
the Torah portion at the end. After helping you think about how to establish a society at home where shall we say the many wars that people have within a society are to be judged. When you do a bad action to another person, it's a little war. When you kill somebody inadvertently with negligence, it's a kind of war. You were rough. You didn't play safe, and you were violent. Maybe without malice, but you were violent towards another, and so. Mankind needs justice in order to straighten out the roughness of inner societal war. Now the Torah portion will say, okay, let's now talk about actual war with the other, that you're having actual declared war. And it says in chapter 20, verse 1, Ki tetzeh lemilchama lo oivecha. It's a very famous verse because it was a song during the Gush Katif period. Ki tetzeh lemilchama lo oivecha, right? So if you go out to war upon your enemy, Rashi says, be careful to recognize that your enemy is your enemy. Don't try to think that your enemy is your friend. Know when to make war, know when to make peace. And he says, and you saw horses, chariots, a nation that's bigger than you. Do not fear them, because Hashem, your God, is with you. He's taking you out of Egypt, i.e., hearken back to the past when you defeated a much superior army. And then later on, it talks about the priest of war, the priest who is anointed for war, which is such a cool thing. By the way, my mother describes a real life Kohen Mashiach Milchama. She describes that Rav Goren, she remembers how Rav Goren was standing during the Yom Kippur War on the bridge to the Galil called the Gesher Bnot Yaakov, and was waving on the troops, literally a man standing there, waving on this rabbi man standing and waving on the troops and giving them strength.
And if people, by the way, don't understand the context there, that was a point at which many of the generals of Israel felt that the country was about to fall. The Gesher Yaakov was the last line of defense to prevent the Syrian army from pouring off the Golan and straight across the northern part of the country to Haifa.
Do you have a show at jewishstory.co about the Yom Kippur War?
Not yet. I haven't gotten there yet. We will. This coming season, which please God, I'm going to start recording tomorrow, is going to go from 1967 to 1978.
Mm-hmm. And that's found at
shorter. Yeah, it's coincidentally
on the jewishstory.co and also on the Land of Israel network, thelandofisrael.com. So
and you can always find me on Facebook.
That's right. Facebook.com/Rav Mike Feuer.
Right.
Rav Mike Feuer.
You'll find it. Yeah.
You'll find it. That's right. Thank you, Google. Let's go on.
Snowboarder named Rav Mike who gets a lot of my traffic, I think.
Oh, does he? That's what he thinks about you. And then it says, it has a verse, don't be afraid, because Hashem your God, verse 4, Ki Hashem Elokechem ha'olech imachem. Hashem your God is walking with you. Lihilachem lachem. He's fighting for you. Imoivechem, with your enemies. Leoshiatchem, to save you, to give you, to redeem you. And then it goes on to the very famous triad of things that excuse you from the army: first year of marriage, first year of building a house, first year of a vineyard, and the fourth one, which is the real kind of climax of it all, which is what's that? If you're afraid. If you're plain old afraid, Rabbi Akiva, according to Rashi, says that's what this is all really about. Right. If you're afraid, and if you're afraid,
you don't have to admit you're afraid. You can just say, "Oh, I haven't actually lived in my house yet," and run off the battlefield. But yes,
what always strikes me?
What's that?
Is that the ones that are afraid leave? Does that mean that the other ones are not afraid? Like I've been in those situations where you gearing up for combat and everybody's afraid, But I guess the point is, who can process that fear and overcome it, as opposed to those who really can't.
Well, let's look at the pasuk a second. Look at chapter 20, verse 8, because that's what you're saying. Right? They add and they say to the people, See, there's two things there. It's not just that you're afraid, because like you're pointing out, anybody is afraid in that situation unless you happen to be stupendously stupid, on some level, but rach halevav, but their heart has gone soft, meaning courage, even in English, is rooted in the Latin of cor, of heart, is the capacity of your heart to overcome your fear and move you to right action. So it's not that they're afraid alone, it's that they're afraid and rach levav, their heart, they just don't have it in them to overcome. That's the problem. The problem is not being afraid. The problem is actually having the rach levav that prevents them from being courageous. Mm-hmm. Remembering that courage is not a lack of fear. Courage is actually an existence of fear and the commitment to overcome it.
That's right. When I was in the army, we jumped out of airplanes. And there was a guy who was a really tough guy, and he would get into the airplane, get ready to jump, and this is what would happen to him. He would just be like, "Hey, I'm ready to go," and he would just pass right out. Right. There was something in his psyche,
psyche or whatever. Yeah,
he could not handle the airplane. He could not handle it, and he was subsequently kicked out of the fighting paratrooper units because he just could not.
Right,
and it was funny. He wasn't acting scared, but something in his body would just shut off.
Wow.
When I was a funny story that happened to me is that I heard a rumor that they would ask you the question, "Who wants to jump first?" from the airplane. So I'm like, oh man, everybody's going to want that. So I got to make sure that I get it because everybody's going to want it. So here's my tactic. When they start asking that question, I'm going to jump up and yell as loud as I can, saying me, me, me. Okay. And I'm like, I'm going to win this thing. So, when the day before the jump,
so American.
The day before the jump, they're like, all right, we just want to ask a question. Who wants to jump? I was like, that's it. I jumped up. We were all sitting on a big grass. I jumped up. I'm like, me. And they were all looking at me like this. And I turned around and I saw everybody else just sitting there like this. Like, do not pick me. Okay. So I misjudged what everybody else was feeling. Oh, sorry about that. Knock that down. I totally misjudged the feelings that other people had about this thing. And guess who got to jump out of the airplane first? It was me. And that really just meant that I got to actually stand at the doorway for about a minute and a half, which is exactly an eternity when you're standing at a doorway. You see, when the door opens in the airplane, something in your body says, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong.
You should not be doing this.
And when you stick your fingers on the outside of the door, which is what you have to do, and you're like, and the wind is on your nails and on your fingers, and you're like, this is wrong. And then you see the little tiny cars driving on the highway, and you're like, I remember thinking, I was like, you bastard, you are listening to radio right now, and I'm about to jump out of this airplane. Okay. But you know what? It was a great experience, and I got to jump out of that airplane. And it was all right. And it was all right. We of course didn't use it in war. Israel hasn't jumped officially in a big army capacity from airplanes in war since the Machpelah Pass, I think in 1948. Is that 56? Yeah. So we haven't jumped out of airplanes. But in any case, I have no idea why I'm talking about this. But
we're talking about Yirah Rach Levav, meaning.
Oh yeah.
Your very astute observation that it doesn't seem to make sense. Isn't everybody scared? And the answer is, of course, everybody's scared.
Yeah.
The problem here is Rach Levav.
Right. And that dude, he looks like he couldn't do it. He couldn't do that mission. Whatever his, no judgment hit there.
No, and I think that's what the Torah is saying here. Is like, we're not interested in judgment. We're interested in victory. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that victory in the world is always a partnership between humanity and God. And in this case, between Am Yisrael and God. And so therefore, since God doesn't really actually need us, we're definitely the junior partner. What he needs is our courage to be a vessel for his work.
The reason I had to pause just for a second here is because I had to look something up, and we're finishing right now. And that is really about a last part of this Torah portion that I want to talk about, which is when you find a dead body between two cities. Okay? We know that even the high priest, who is not supposed to become, what's it called? Impure. Is that the word? He's not supposed to become impure to a dead body. Even a high priest, defiled. Even a high priest walking down the street, and he sees a dead body that nobody is taking care of. He is commanded to stop everything and to become defiled in order to take care of this dead body. That is the level of which we sanctify, ironically, we sanctify the body, and we see the original thing we learned in Genesis, which is God is created in the image, a man is created in the image of God. The reason I had to look something up is because less than a year ago, there was a young man by the name of Dvir Sorek. And Dvir Sorek was murdered right in between this town that I'm in right now and our next door town, which is, I have to tell you, Rabbi Mike, a street worth. There's a street between the entrance of this town and its entrance it's the other side of an interchange, of a small interchange.
Sure, I know.
And this Dvir Sorek was murdered right there between two guard posts. Okay. And I never forgot that this to me was like, wow, he fell between the cracks, Dvir Sorek. And the defenders of Israel missed it. They didn't see the attack exactly there. And I always thought to myself, wow, that murder was to me the story of Egla Arufa. Like, we did not spill this blood, but also somehow we didn't manage to protect this boy right between our towns. This was less than a year ago. And it was a powerful. I just wanted to make sure I remember the name, Dvir Sorek, who happens to actually be, alav shalom, the son of a very famous author here in Israel. In any case, that's something that happened. And the Torah portion goes on to say that there has to be an elaborate ceremony that takes place in order to say, whoa, we don't know who this man exactly belonged to. And there's something wrong about that. Somehow we have to say we didn't spill this blood, but it's like we kind of a little bit did if this guy fell between the cracks.
Yeah, in many ways, it's one of the most all-embracing moral statements of the Torah, which is that you can't divest yourself of responsibility. You mean there is obviously gradations. We're not going to blame. It's not like like the Sanhedrin, like Rashi says in the Midrash, like when they say our hands didn't spill this blood. No one actually thinks they killed this guy, but the reality is that our obligation is proactively to create a world in which such things can't happen, like you're pointing out. And if someone like Dvir Sorek gets murdered on our roads, then we've allowed a world to develop. We haven't taken the level of responsibility for the safety and well-being of people. Then yeah, on some level we are responsible.
Mm-hmm. Rabbi Mike, for the Torah portion is called Shoftim. There's a lot of laws in this Torah portion. It's about society. It's about how to build society, how to keep evil at bay. And allow it's really mostly about how to keep evil at bay, with very few points about how to serve God properly. This Torah portion is really about how do we allow justice to flourish by pursuing that justice, which means also suppressing evil.
Building a social structure which will allow the world to flourish.
A very important Torah portion for everybody to learn, especially today when we're trying to rebuild the Jewish society in the land in the Third Commonwealth. Rabbi Mike Feuer, Rav Mike Feuer, people can find you by going to jewishstory.co. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Yishai Fleisher Show on the Land of Israel Network podcast, and also on YouTube, Periscope, and Facebook. And a lot of people are commenting, and I'm going to get to their comments in a second, but I'm going to let you go and thank you again for your time, for being with us.
You're very welcome. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom to you, Rabbi Mike. Thank you so much for your awesome and erudite knowledge and sharing it with us. Toda rabah.
Bye.
All right, folks, you are listening to the Yishai Fleisher Show, and what an awesome Torah portion we have. What an awesome Torah we have. And so I put up this picture of defund the police because what I'm really trying to say is that, of course, we should be funding the emotionally and physically the continued law and order that we need in our land. Please check out yishaifleisher.com/donate to help us keep the show loud and proud and free and broad. And so that's part of what you do to help fund the spiritual judgment and police and light in this world. I'm going to say goodbye now to the podcast side of the equation. More great stuff is on the way, so stay tuned. And we're going to get to your questions here on Facebook Live. So more great stuff is on the way, and shalom. All right, and now I'm going to touch on your questions. First thing, Paul says, shalom, Rabbi. Lou, my good friend Lou, says, shalom, Yishai and Rav Mike. Lavera says, shalom. Bill from Indiana says, shalom. Eva says, shalom. Galia's got a lot to say today. And she, of course, says, shalom. Barbara, my good friend, says, Trump is running unopposed with Marxists making a debut at the DNC. All right, that's when we got a little political. Rav Robert says, without getting into it, Trump is crazy. All Biden has to do is to be sane. The bar is set so low. Aaron says it clearly refers to the land of Israel, what we were talking about before. Alice says America can fall like the Roman Empire. All empires can fall, of course. Let's see what else. What else did we talk about here? Says Jay White. He says, Shalom, guys. Much love, and may the redemption come now. Love to both of you and the families. Josh, thank you very much, Josh. And from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, says Ed and Julie, I agree with Rav Mike. Don't use evil terminology to explain what is good from Hashem. He doesn't want any mixed upness. Okay, that makes good sense. And Galia says, good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, Galia. And Reuven says, Shalom uvracha, Shalom to you, Reuven. Thank you very much, friends, so much for being with me. And there's more great stuff all the time happening at the Land of Israel Network, at YishaiFleisher.com, JewishStory.co, tons of content. And let me just say a few things about some of our sponsors. The most important sponsor that we have, of course, is the Jewish community of Hebron, where the tombs of the fathers and mothers are. So check out hebronfund.org and help us continue to keep the place strong and the forefathers and mothers safe. You could be part of the protectors of the Machpelah, the defenders of the Machpelah, of the tomb of the fathers and mothers. If you're considering Aliyah to the Land of Israel, we'd love to have you. Check out Nefesh B'Nefesh, the Aliyah, preeminent Anglo Aliyah organization, nbn.org.il. As I mentioned before, we also give you the great option of getting your own tchelet. Check out tchelet, Tekhelet. That's the true blue Jew string. Very powerful biblical string. And we have our newest sponsor, which is called IsraelWines.com. Go to Israel Wines, order your wine from the Land of Israel at coupon code Yishai. Check it out, and I think that will be really good for you. So from Israel, from Judea, from the Land of Israel, lots of love. Thank you so much for being with me. And it's such a pleasure to be able to broadcast to you from Israel to the world. That's really our mission, to broadcast from Israel to the world. And lots of love. Please write me an email, Yishai@YishaiFleisher.com. And I look forward to hearing from you. And we'll be on again before Shabbat. But in the meantime, you had the Torah portion. And so I say Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Lots of love and blessings from the Land of Blessings.